Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance project and delves into new creative ventures. Today, we'll be giving you a fairly brief album update, and we will focus on the October 31st Second Story rehearsal. So, in keeping with our tradition, shall we say, at this point,
Sure.
We'll start with the album. We're almost there. We now are finishing up our final tweaks of the launch e-blast for the entire album. And I can confidently say we will have very good news for you on that front next week.
I'm glad you're confident.
We're thinking I'm thinking optimistically. But I will say that I know Jonathan has encountered quite a few technical challenges in getting all of this set up, all of the songs and album images and so forth on YouTube in a way that you feel is aesthetically pleasing and professionally done. Mm-hmm. So
yes, it always there's always glitches you can't account for, and it always takes longer than you think. So, plan extra time if you can.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, really trying to get the videos to kind of sit in the right order, the right way, and that if you play one, it then rolls right into the next. It's all these little things that should seem easy, but there's always one little button out of place that you have to comb through. So, I'm nearly there. It's gonna happen.
And I will say that Jonathan has so much natural talent with computer tech stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
But no, he's highly creative, and he really does, because I can tell you from experience that as someone who has a little bit of savvy, but not a lot, I've had a good amount of training to be able to do what it is I do, and it takes hours and hours and hours. So it looks simple, in fact, is anything but. So I can vouch for your statement. But we'll keep you in suspense for one more week on that and move on then to Second Story, which has been pretty suspenseful in and of itself because we're just a couple of weeks away from showtime. And with that in mind, Jonathan informed us before the October 31st rehearsal that he would have to both leave early and arrive late, because he had to attend the Halloween parades of his two children.
I've got 2 kids, 2 parades.
2 parades.
And a rehearsal in between. So.
Exactly. And I know for Jonathan, this, from a context standpoint, this capped off a crazy week of responsibilities and commitments, and having to host Rhonda's parents from out of town for a week. So it was really a crazy week for you, all things considered.
Sure.
So
lovely.
Just
lots of moving parts, that's all.
Absolutely. And this was the second to last rehearsal before the Emelin show. And not surprisingly, we had to squeeze in quite a bit to a now very short period of time. So knowing that, John, did you feel any pressure?
I don't know what that word means. Pressure? What pressure? What are you talking about? Yes, lots of pressure. In terms of the work, I call upon my experience and my Zen mastery of getting ready for a show. it's yeah, there's a lot of faith involved, and you just have to breathe and keep chipping away at the stone. So yeah, we were getting the costumes are continuing to shift and evolve, but I think we've arrived at we arrived at something this past rehearsal, which is
yes,
which will be it. That will be it. This is what we're gonna do. And then of course all the last minute. We'll talk about the costumes in a second, but all the just further combing of the piece. Yeah, it's just a lot.
it is. Well, today, or this rehearsal, I should say, was the do or die date in terms of costumes. And so Lorena and Mandy went right to it in the beginning of rehearsal, and it came down to, do we want the gray top versus the nude leotard? Do we want the white flowing pants or the off-white flowing pants, and in which combination? But ultimately, it was settled on the off-white flowing pants with the double layer nude leotards. So that was a surprise, but we came to agreement, and believe it or not, we, checked that one off. So, John, the process of experimentation with the costume finally comes to a close. Are you relieved?
Yes, I'm absolutely relieved. My dancers will not go on stage naked. They will not go on stage looking like clowns. They will be lovely. It'll be beautiful, and it'll be of the work, which is important. I now have some tailoring to do, but
yes,
that's always the case.
Well, speaking of which, I was going to share with you that thank God John knows how to do that, because Jonathan, with Lorena's help, began alterations of the costume right on the spot and cutting out the inner layer of the
the lining
diaphanous
of the pant
pants
needed to come out. Yeah.
Now, I will confess to you, my friends and colleagues, that I do not have this talent. So I was in awe of John, and
you were kind of looking at me like a unicorn. Like, what is this strange creature? I was like, I'm cutting pants.
I couldn't believe it. I said, thank God for Jonathan and Lorena, and I assumed that not only do they know how, but after years and years of professional shows and working with lots of costumes, I'm sure you had opportunities to put this to the test in the past.
Yes, this was all in my wheelhouse.
Yes.
Even if I don't like to admit it, or I don't like to do it terribly often.
Well, fortunately, we had them, and we will be ready. So after a quick warm-up, Lorena and Mandy decided to do what they call a walk and talk run-through of Brittle Branches to no music. And I anticipated that they would be conversing throughout the run-through to ensure that they had the choreography down pat and the qualitative details under control. But they really did very little talking at all, much to my surprise, other than Lorena clarifying with Jonathan about the placement of her hands around her face in a particular sequence. So they then moved on to the experimentation with the white makeup, which is being applied to the lower part of the leg into the foot, the lower part of the arm into the hands, and then almost as a mask from just below the eyebrows to the hairline, and from about here all the way up. So, John, can you describe the two different makeup approaches that were basically under consideration and that you were experimenting with at that time?
Yeah, so a lot of this makeup concept was inspired by the Butoh dance movement, in which there's variations on it, but the most stereotypical is the entire body being covered in a thick white makeup, almost making the dancer look like they're a statue, like a marble statue, or like a ghost, like a ghoul with white, like alabaster white skin. I wanted that sort of feel, but I didn't want that exact look. I wanted a variation on it, and so we thought of just having, from the hand to the elbow, and then it's sort of having a natural bleed into normal flesh color. Same thing on the legs, and then I was like, well, then somehow the face and head need that as well. And I thought, okay, well, what if they were transitioning into that sort of ghostly, ethereal lightness right around the eyes and up, all of which I very much like in theory. When we started to apply the makeup, it was hard to get the right thickness right away. So we had a very thin layer on, but as we continued to play with it, and then we realized, more water, more rubbing, more layers. Okay, eventually we started to get that more opaque white. And so we had the dancers, do a more light application on one arm, a darker application on another, a little bit on the leg. We had streaks on the leg. We had a more solid application on the leg. And then when we did the run, we kind of saw, or I took a look and saw what I preferred. And I actually preferred the lighter application. It looked more just like, I don't know, it looked less like it was a specific statement about we are these other creatures, and more like, oh, our skin is just paling. It looked more like we are becoming ghosts, that in a much more real way. So I liked that very much. I liked that you could still see some flesh tone coming through, and so then debating between those two things, I then made the executive decision. We're going to go with a much lighter application, not so extreme. And the one thing I noted, and something that kept coming into my mind, which I learned both from a graphic designer friend of mine and a costume designer friend of mine. They both kind of taught me this lesson at different times. They said sometimes it's not about like making a clear making like a clear distinction or a clear statement about what something is. Sometimes you just want to make a subtle statement about what it is not. And I'll try and give an example. Like in the costume design perspective, there was we were working with these costumes, and I saw the designer looking at the neckline for one of the pieces, and it was just this very, the top was black, and it was this very clear line across the dancer's neck. And I just heard her kind of say, well, I like the whole dress, but that neckline, it needs to soften. And she just added this tiny bit of fringe, not even fringe, lace. It was a tiny bit of lace to the neckline that you could barely see. Like you can, it's not like she was adding a big frill, but it just softened that hard line.
Right.
It just softened that line to the bit where, like, again, from stage, you wouldn't see, oh, look, there's lace on her collar. What an interesting thing. It was just, oh, it wasn't a bold line anymore. It was something softer. It was just a transition from the dress into her neck. And I was like, wow, and what a huge difference
It's amazing.
this thing that you barely see made. You know, it took it out of a costume and into much more of an elegant look, and much more of a realistic and evocative look. And I remember the same thing. I had to make this poster for an assignment back in my grad school days, and I had a graphic designer friend take a look at it, and she's like, oh, I like how you have everything placed. She's like, but that white line you have going across the page, it's just so crisp, it kind of sticks out. What if you just paled it a few degrees, made it gray?
Right.
And because I think I had asked her, should I do a white line or a black line?
Oh.
And she goes, do the faintest gray, so you don't even realize it's not white, but it's not white.
Right, exactly.
And I was like, wow, and it made such a huge difference. And you know, the line was clearly there, but it wasn't calling attention to itself, and you could see the other things that were more important. So when I was looking at the ladies trying on the makeup and trying to decide that, I was like, oh, what's most important to me is that their arms don't look completely bare. I don't want it to just be a costume and then bare arms. I want there to be just some texture that takes it out of pedestrian. So just this gentle layer of white on their arms and legs is just enough to say, oh, you know, attention was paid, and we're dealing with something that's not completely normal, but we're not making a huge statement as to what that is. It's just slightly different.
With the term...
Sorry, I'm going to just push this button here and see if we're still there. Are we still there? We're
still there.
Beautiful.
With the term suggestive?
Yeah.
Suggestive of a particular kind of a look, or it hints at, perhaps?
I think so. And again, you know, we're questioning, well, will it read from stage? And we won't know that until we're on the stage and we see it under the stage lights and everything. But I feel kind of good about it, because I said, again, to myself, well, even if the audience doesn't specifically see the makeup, they will be able to sense that something is there. And again, it's that it's not pedestrian, or you know, to bring it back to the costume example, that it's not a hard line. There's just something softening it.
Right.
So there you go. That was my thought process.
So we hope you'll come to the Emelin show and let us know if that was your perception.
Right. Tell us what you think, audience.
Absolutely. Well, the next run was the first one that was ever done with costumes and makeup together.
Yes, that's right.
But with the variation a little bit heavier on some arms and legs, a little bit lighter on others, but otherwise this is the farthest that we had come to this point. So, John, all of the elements of the dance were literally as well as figuratively coming together at this point. So, as the creator, choreographer, artist, what was going through your mind, and is this representative of what you feel right before a big show as these elements begin to hang together?
I think what I felt was representative, at least of how I usually feel. It's definitely exciting. I'm definitely happy with all of the elements right now. I'm happy with the choreography, I'm happy with the music, I'm happy with the costumes, I'm happy with the makeup. I think what was particularly exciting was that some of those things had just fallen into place that moment, and this was then the first time seeing it and going, okay, well, this is what my fully realized piece is going to be.
Wow.
And that's awesome. I think I'm I'm pretty cool and pretty understated with my excitement, and I think a lot of that is just being tempered by the fact of like, okay, but what are all the tiny other little micro details that I have to think about? There's now all the last minute technical details of like getting into the theater.
Right.
What's the logistics of that, and what's the timing of the tech and the tech rehearsal, and the lighting, and just all of that still on my mind and making me nervous. So I'm not celebrating, which is a shame. I wish I could be, and I wish I did. I wish I was celebrating this a little bit more, but I think I don't think I've ever celebrated before a premiere.
That may be asking a
I'm
little
happy
much.
when I can celebrate after a premiere.
Exactly.
So I'm just hoping for that.
Well, again, come to the Emelin, see the show, and ask John how he feels in the Q&A afterwards.
Right.
Well, after that momentous run through, Mandy and Lorena quickly got out of costume and makeup. They were kind of happy about that for the moment and decided to do a final run through. And John, I really noticed, and I'll use my layperson's language as best as I can, but the deliberate, drawn out placement of the arms into an extension, into a fabulously designed hand in a way I had not really noticed before. So I think a lot of your notes about the hand design, about how to use the arms and the legs were really manifesting, at least to my layperson's eye. And
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it was it really captured my attention. And after this run through, basically, Lorena and Mandy highlighted 3 things that they wanted to still focus on. One was the way in which they place their arms when they do what I call a back bend. I don't know the technical term, bending over their partner. It's quite a challenging move, but they really wanted to perfect that. And get the exact, as you call it, John, conversation of gestures in the entwined sequences, and make sure that that sort of call and response was in the right order and playing out in the way that John had asked. And finally, they worked on their unison, because there is a section that in which they're dancing, somewhat side by side and somewhat in a mirror, sometimes in a mirror sort of reflecting each other, but does require unison. And then there's a floor sequence that follows it. It's quite challenging to do in unison, and Lorena came up with the idea that, hey, even if we're off a little bit with the music, maybe slightly slow, slightly fast, as long as we can look at one another and coordinate that way, regardless of whether we've got it exactly right with the music, we will stay in sync with one another. And they seemed confident that they'd be able to make that happen.
Yeah.
So, and this was
all
after
I
you
left.
left.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, and as they were getting ready to leave, Mandy and Lorena began speaking a bit about our Art Life event with the Mamaroneck Council of the Arts in December, and thinking about the pieces and or excerpts of pieces that they would like to dance in that particular performance, and noting that, hey, we've got to, in order to bring them back, we've got to go over the videos again. And the intention, at least, was to do that in the upcoming week, so that they could hit the ground running next week and at least do walkthroughs of all of the pieces and excerpts that they determine they want to include. So we have overlapping preparations going on here, but certainly after the Emelin show, they will be, in full swing to prepare for the Art Life event. So we have everything, one on the heels of the other. But we're in show mode, folks. So it's an exciting time. It's a nerve-wracking time, which is why, John, I'm not surprised that you're not feeling celebratory just yet. There are many, many moving pieces, and I think not till it's over is it over, and then you can just, take that proverbial step back, I think, and reflect. And maybe at that point, we'll have a little celebration.
We can pop that champagne.
Yeah, I think it'll be time. So again, lots going on. Stay tuned for the big album announcement.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
This is where you're super excited.
This is where I'm celebrating just a little bit prematurely, but we'll see.
But again, childhood dream. How could he not? So lots to tell you coming up. We'll be hard at work and looking forward to sharing as much of our process as we can with you then. Thank you and good night.